So, I am very happy to introduce David Felton today. David experienced the Cultural Revolution of the 60s and 70s while working for the Los Angeles Times and Rolling Stone magazine. More recently, David, his wife Susan, and daughter Grace have lived on the Upper West Side of Manhattan for more than a quarter of a century. In 2003, they bought a second home here in North Chatham and pretty much moved here full-time when COVID started. In 2008, David retired from MTV, where he worked for 20 years. When new people come up to David Felton, they don't ask him about the Pulitzer he earned at the Los Angeles Times, or his work with Hunter Thompson editing Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, or the time he wrote for Beavis and Butthead. They ask him, "Did you really interview Charles Manson?" And with that, I introduce to you David Felton.
Well, thank all of you for coming out. We may not have enough clink bags, but I'm sort of new to all this, the slideshow and now the microphone and notes and being 85. Well, I'll be new to being 85 next month, but anyway, we'll struggle through. This is really great to see you all. And before I get started, I wanted to show you just a couple of things. This is a photograph of the Pulitzer that hangs on my wall.
It can be great.
Hold your applause. And this is the T-shirt for Beavis that I wrote for Beavis and Butthead. It says, "Knowledge is stupid." It's deep, because every career has an arc. Oh, and by the way, that Pulitzer didn't go just to me. It went to the entire city room staff of the Los Angeles Times for covering the first Watts uprising. Here's a picture of the staff, and I have a little cursor here. Wait, I thought I did. Maybe I don't. Oh, yeah. If I can't find the cursor, I become the cursor. But that's me. This guy is the city editor, Bill Thomas, who was a great backer of me and helped me a lot. Great. And then one result of the first Watts uprising was we hired our first black reporter. Just after. Just saying. So, I'll put that down. I joined the Times in 1963, just after I got out of college, and I became a feature writer, and I did sort of daily brights, which are like funny stories about weird people that lived in the greater LA area. There's quite a few of them. But as the Summer of Love approached in 1967, I became more interested in covering the underground and in the emerging cultural revolution. There was another reporter named Pete Johnson who really knew about the music, and he actually wrote, I think, a couple of rock and roll reviews before they actually had rock and roll reviewers in papers. And he invited me over to his house one night, and he had a test pressing of Sgt. Pepper. And we listened to that, and I can still remember the last piano chord of A Day in the Life, just going, fading out, and we knew that the music had changed, that rock and roll had changed, that everything was changing in the culture, and that there was a new form of sort of people's art, because you could hear it, and you could play it, and you could get involved in it, and it was real art. Anyway, enough about that. So I would have liked to have been a hippie right then, but the Times had a dress code. You had to wear a coat and tie and short hair and all this stuff. I got a lot of flowered ties, but it wasn't really enough. And then I saw Lennon wearing this pair of granny glasses, so I bought a pair and I wore them to work. And this one reporter, a friend of mine, flipped out. He said, "What the hell do you think you're trying to prove?" And this was my response. But anyway, Bill Thomas was a great influence on me. He at that time, he gave me this book to read, Been Down So Long It Looks Like Up to Me. Yeah, that's it, by Richard Farina. And it was a great book about this new feeling. And then I went up and covered the Summer of Love. Both at the beginning, I wrote 5 stories, and at the end, Bill came up to me and he said, go back up there, the Summer of Love is over, go back up there and do something experimental. Try something new, which is all I needed. And, so I actually used a tape recorder for the first time because I figured that for an outsider to cover a new culture, just use their words. And that's what I did. I talked to hippies that still lived in the Haight. I talked to hippies that had moved to the countryside in different families and in the Bay Area. And then I came back to Pasadena where I was living and spent 6 weeks working on this, culling, with the material I had gotten. And I went to Bill and I gave him 30 typed pages. And he laughed. He said, there's a limit to what we can run. And I said, that's Act 1. And I ended up writing wait a second, I've got to get to my notes now. Ended up writing a 3-act play, basically, called Haight-Ashbury Revisited, Some Observations in the Week After the Death of Chocolate George. And they ran it. It was the longest piece they'd ever run up to that time. It's 2 full pages. I'll give you a shot of it.
Oh, wow.
And and then I think they really liked it because the PR department did a reprint of it to show people. And there's some copies that I copied that you can have if you want. But it was, and then I think it made, as a result, I mean, I don't know if it was as a result, but after that, Bill Thomas was made editor-in-chief. And when he retired in 1989, they ran a piece about him in the Times that started with this piece. It started with talking about this piece, and they called it a shot fired across the bow of conventional journalism. And actually, thank you. And I'm going to brag a lot, so. And so then, and it also, when he died in 2014, they ran an obit, and it also mentioned the story. So, I think, but also, it influenced all my future writing. This approach, and the weird thing is, they didn't even give me a byline on it because they had a little editorial blurb, and it's in the reprint too, that mentions my name and says that they said that I had winnowed the material from countless interviews, and I used my byline then was Dave Felton, but it was really me. But I don't think they thought the piece was written. They thought it was winnowed. I always thought I was a wallower, but I'm a winnower and a writer. And I think it definitely helped me get my job at Rolling Stone 2 years later, which was great because now I really could be a hippie. I could live the hippie lifestyle I love, love tolerance and freedom and all the fun stuff too. And and my first assignment was Charles Manson. And I didn't want to do the story particularly. I wasn't into that thing, but into that kind of news really. But Jan Wenner, the editor, said, "No, it's a good story." He said, "We'll have a headline: Manson is innocent." It didn't turn out that way, but and he paired me with David Dalton, who was a music writer and was from the culture, and he was from the culture. I was from L.A., so I knew that part, and we teamed up well. And he was also a friend of, or he had hung out with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, he and Dennis hung out with Manson, so that was another qualifications. So what happened was, I guess when the word got out that we were going to do a story on him, this guy named Phil Kaufman, who was a former jail buddy of Manson's, was now producing his record album called Lie, and he called us and he said, I can get you into jail to see Manson. So he did. We had to pose as lawyers. We couldn't use tape recorders. We couldn't talk about the murders, but we met Manson before the trial even. And I have to say, I guess he was charismatic. He had kind of a swing to his walk and the hair and all the stuff. But I thought he was a real performer. He did shtick, and he would repeat the shtick, you know. It was always about him. He'd say, "Oh, they're after me. They're after me for stolen dude buggies," which was true there too. But he was very animated. You know, he'd grab his crotch, he'd pose like he was on the cross and all this stuff, and so he was very entertaining in a way. And he had these long fingernails, and he'd click them across the formica table. This is kind of weird, but and then we spent a lot of time talking about the White Album, you know, and but we spent about 2 hours with him, and then we left the jail, went back to our car, and David and I had our first fight. David said, "I think he's innocent," and I said, "Are you crazy? He's a con artist. You can't." So that was awkward. But the next day, we met with Aaron Stovitz, the prosecutor. And I don't know if he thought we were just some little hippie rag or something. He told us everything. I said, "Anytime you want me to shut off the tape recorder, I'm glad to do it." He never asked. He showed us all the evidence. He showed us Manson's gun. He showed us bloody clothes that the family had worn. He showed us Gino LaBianca, you know, the couple that lived up a few towns away, actually, from Sharon Tate. But he showed how they'd carved the word war in his stomach with a fork. And they'd written, you know, helter skelter and piggies on the wall in blood. And he had a lot of stuff. And he was eating this grapefruit all the time. We had I just remember that. But I think really why we did so well on this story was we didn't know what we were doing. We were very naive. We spent time out at the Spawn Ranch. In fact, we spent a whole afternoon there, and I met the family. I met the girls and the men, boys and girls, whatever, they met George Spahn, the owner, who was blind, the old man. If you saw Once Upon a Time in America, that was a very accurate rendering of the Spahn Ranch, as I remember it. They made dinner for us, and as the sun was going down, we saw this guy Clem ride a horse around this corral, and they were both naked, the horse and Clem. So it was pretty nice, and so we did that research, and David and his wife stayed at our house in Pasadena while we were working on this, and a couple days later I got a call from Ed Sanders of the Fugs, a rock group, the Fugs, and he was also covering Manson. He wrote a book called The Family, but he called me and he said, "Stay away from Clem. He kills people." And here's a picture of Clem. And then a few weeks later, Clem called and he left a message on my answering machine. Remember those things, the answering machines? And he said, "Where are those photographs we gave you?" Charlie says, "You're only as good as your word." So I called Jan and Sam. I said, "Send those photos back as fast as you can." You know, they never bothered us after that. And what we ended up writing, let me see here. Oh, I should be holding this because I had these so I could get at them easily by doing this. It's all screwed up. We ended up writing a 30,000-word, 6-part epic called Year of the Fork, Night of the Hunter. And it included the Manson interview, included description of the crimes in Los Angeles. It included, Stovitz's evidence, which we didn't use his name, but and the visit to the Spawn Ranch, and it included something that I had interviewed several people in the entertainment industry in Hollywood who had hung out with Manson, and they told me about all his miracles. So I thought it was like a future Bible or gospel, as we call it, the Book of Manson, when the article came out, it was we scooped the regular press. They were infuriated. How do we scoop them? We weren't even trying to do that. We didn't know what we were doing. And the judge took Stovitz off the case and replaced him with Vincent Bugliosi. And then Bugliosi wrote Helter Skelter and made a lot of money out of it. But Stovitz just liked telling the story. He was a really great storyteller. He got in trouble with a lot of judges because he just talked too much. He talked too much, Anyway, and the piece won a National Magazine Award, which wasn't easy because we applied to both the Pulitzer and the National Magazine Award people, and they had all these rules, to be a newspaper for the Pulitzer, you had to come out at least once a week, and we came out every 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And for the National Magazine Award, you had to have staples. We didn't have staples. We were like the Village Voice, you just folded it over. So Jan had me apply to both and write an angry letter saying, you guys are missing out on a huge story. This cultural revolution and all this stuff. And the National Magazine Awards changed the rules, and we won it. And I just wanted to read one thing from to me is one of the, it's short, one of the most alarming and weird parts of the whole epic. And it was one of from the Book of Manson, according to Lance Fairweather, which is not his real name. And I don't even remember his full name. I think I know what it is. I have to go back and do some research. But that, and it started off by saying, it said, I guess I lost this part. It said Manson. That's good. Oh yeah, it says at the lead in at the Book of according to Lance Fairweather, it says true identity of Lance Fairweather has puzzled Mansonist scholars for years. And so that's how it was. And then he says, this is part of the interview really. During the past year, I asked myself many times, what made Charlie change? What was the main cause? And one thought kept recurring. If Abbey Road had come out sooner, maybe there wouldn't have been a murder. That's far out, I know, but Sgt. Pepper was such a happy album, such a happy acid trip, and it made Charlie very happy. And then the White Double album was such a down album. Mm-hmm. I know it affected Charlie deeply. And then Abbey Road was another happy one. And I just can't help thinking, if Abbey Road had come out sooner, maybe Sharon Tate would be alive today. Yeah, that's fine. A year later, Annie Leibovitz and I, she was working for Rolling Stone, covered the last night at the Fillmore West, which was a big historic event, Bill Graham's place. And so we went there and I covered it. And then after everybody left, she took a picture. There was all this debris on the floor, so she took a picture of me sitting on the floor with a glass of champagne. And then when we got back to the magazine, afterwards, Time Magazine called her and said, we're writing an essay on the end of the hippie era. Could you send us your footage? And she did, unused footage, she did. And they did run this essay and this picture. Fading of a Fantasy. And so that's me, and so I got to be a hippie just in the nick of time. Anyway.
Not just a glass of champagne.
Yeah. So let's see what's next. So one problem I had at going to Rolling Stone was, how does the journalist cover celebrities? I didn't want to just write puff pieces, and afraid of that, and so I figured, well, you have to focus on the art, and the art has to be newsworthy, and that was sort of what guided me. And a good example of that was that Annie and I went over to Berkeley, and I think it must have been I'm not sure what it was, 73 or whatever, and saw Richard Pryor do his new act, and it was amazing. I mean, he's always been amazing, but he was doing stuff that was so real and so well acted, and yet comedy in a way, a new kind of comedy, so we asked if we could. If Annie could videotape it, so that when I did the story, I could get his movements, his facial expressions and all that, along with the words. And we also put together at the time that Lily Tomlin, who Richard had worked with, he was on her show, her special, was doing the same thing. Her characters were coming out of real life. It wasn't as harsh as you might imagine as Richards, but it was the same thing, and they really loved working together. So we decided to do a 2-issue thing called Jive Times, and the first issue would feature Richard, and the second issue would feature Lily. And the first issue with Richard was great. It was a great story. I mean, his background and his early years and all that sort of journalistic stuff, but it also included his struggles with the law and struggles with censorship, and it also included a script that he had written based on his life, which later did become a movie, I think. So we took parts of that, but it was mainly segments of this radical new act he did, and. I just everything he said, you could see when he would this bitch left him. That was one of his bits. When your bitch leaves you. Sorry. You could really see the broken heart on his face and all this. So it was a good story. And also there was a time when Annie and I and Richard were sitting in a coffee shop talking about the story in LA someplace, and he just started sobbing. He just started, and that was, he had a lot of troubles, particularly with the law. But the second issue, Lily Tomlin, she was the best interview I've ever had done. 13 hours of her nonstop remembering and performing at the same time. I mean, she just is the one person doing all that stuff. So that became another 3-act play, and in which the characters included, Lily Tomlin as the comedian, and then Mary Jean Tomlin, which is her real name, she's the one telling the story, and then all her characters, other people she's met, and me, I had the name Groupie. That would be to ask her questions, and she also loaned us her high school diary, and we printed excerpts of that, and it's just like one of her characters. I mean, there's just no difference. And so near the end of this piece, which is quite long, this play we got into a discussion. She brought it up of the problem of using other people, not your family or your friends, but for comedy, and whether that was valid or a cheap shot or whatever. And she had this character, Wanda V. Wilford, who was a country singer, and she said it represented all country singers or a spoof on them, but it looked like Loretta Lynn. And she looked just like her, and she was worried that might be taken the wrong way. And she was on her way to the Grammys, where she knew she was going to meet Loretta Lynn. And she was very worried about this. So we had this little discussion, and I just want to read this one thing because I find it very powerful. But she says, I mean, I may find out I'm really lying, and that I've been lying all this time, that I'm really making fun of everyone. Groupie, me. What does that mean? What does making fun mean? And she says, I don't think you can, in a sense, because making fun is not appreciating, you know? You have to appreciate, you just have to. How can you not appreciate that humanity? It's like this picture I got at home of my father when he was 12 or 14. Well, this is sentimental, I'm sure it is. He's working out in the farm with overalls on, and he's kind of got his arms around two older guys who are too tall for him, as though he's really part of them. And he's just got such a cocky little smile on his face, just bursting with something. You know what I mean? And then my father dies when he's 57. It's not just my father, like the people I grew up with. Boris, who was a communist. He was extremely well educated and real smart, very didactic, of course, to be screaming about all the time, and he just knew about life, but he didn't know nothing. And if Melba, you know, I think that's his wife, Melba, you know, if they had a fight, he would be reduced to the same passions and fears and everything. They were all like humans. Everybody had these incredible highs and terrible lows. Everybody was afraid of something. They could be real petty and ugly, or they could be just real beautiful and uplifting and have wonderful little quirky moments where they made you laugh, and other moments where you just hated them. And I saw that nobody knew anything. Nobody knew any answer to anything. How can people, whatever ends they come to, how can you not have some incredible appreciation for them and the humor and everything that goes with it? And then followed by, that part's over, and then it comes in, it is the evening of March 2nd, and stars of the recording industry are gathering at the Hollywood Palladium for the 1974 Grammy Awards. Lily is there to present one of the awards, but before the show starts, someone leads her to Loretta Lynn, who has requested a meeting. Lily is nervous. Loretta, at first I didn't know what to say because I heard you did a takeoff on me on your show. People had written me these letters. But anyway, I thought it was one of the greatest compliments that's ever been paid to me. Lily, well, you know, it wasn't meant to be funny, or Loretta, it made me aware of things I did that I didn't know I did. I thought it was one of the biggest compliments ever. Anyway, so Annie and I kept in touch with both Richard and Lily during the years when we moved back here to New York. And I wrote a cover story of Richard when he had his first movie about his act called Live in Concert. And this was a big victory because for the first time, everybody could see his act without any censorship. And, you know, it was censored all the time on television. And censorship, I forgot, was also what happened at the same time as, or actually before, the Cultural Revolution, back when Howl was legal in the 50s, was legally said to be not obscene. Up to that time, everything we saw, everything we read on, and they saw on TV and saw in the movies was censored. It was all censored. Our best writers were censored. You know, Norman Mailer had to say "fug" or something like that, or "frog" or whatever he said. So this was a big victory, and I was very excited. That was another reason I was excited to go to Rolling Stone. They printed the whole language as it is. And I have to say, when in the Manson piece, the only word, I might have used some bad words, but the only word I really regretted is I used the word dig. I was saying something, but dig this. That's not journalism. That's not
We know what you mean.
Anyway, so we kept in touch with them at that concert, and then Lily did a show on Broadway, and then Richard set himself on fire. Yeah. And I flew out to do a story on that, and they weren't letting anybody. We were in the waiting room, but they wouldn't let anybody, any reporters or anybody, go see him in the burn unit. Then I came back, finished the story, came back, and we printed it. And then I got a call from Richard's people, and they said, he wants to see you. And I was the only reporter allowed to go back and see him in the burn unit. And I just said, well, we would have put you on the cover, but you lived. And he kind of laughed. You know? And then in 2015, Lily played the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall. And Susan and I went to see her, and she was great. And then afterwards, I went backstage and I said, I'd like to see her. And she said, she's not taking any visitors. She's not seeing anybody. So I just wrote my name on a little piece of paper and handed it and said, give it to her. And about 10 minutes later, they said, Lily wants to see you. So Susan kept saying, why don't you just go? You just go. So we went back, and Lily came out, and she just said, David, I've been thinking of you every day of my life. Which is probably an exaggeration. And here's the picture of the three of us. Anyway. Now, on to the next person. How are we doing on time? Not too bad. In 1976, Brian Wilson finally got out of bed. Of the Beach Boys. He had been retreated from the Beach Boys and everyone and stayed in his room doing a lot of drugs for a long time, and he was in bad shape. And then they found him a therapist, and he came out and he started working again. And record companies promoted that, and there were all these stories about this miracle of Brian Wilson in the 15th year of the Beach Boys and so forth. And I didn't know what to write about. I was supposed to, and so I decided I would try to expand the Rolling Stone interview form, which is really not a form, it's just the interview, but they're famous for the Rolling Stone interview with Chuck Berry, the Rolling Stone interview with Dylan or Lennon or whatever, you know. So I decided to make it the Rolling Stone interview with not just Brian, but all the Beach Boys, his mom, his wife, his dad, who had died a few years earlier. I'll get back to that later. And his shrink, Dr. Eugene Landy. Now, some of you may know that name. He was eventually lost his license. He was an operator. I could tell right away, just from the way he dressed and the way he talked. And also, he had all these restrictions. I couldn't meet Brian or talk to him unless I agreed to show Dr. Landy the entire piece I wrote before it was printed. And I'd never made a deal like that. It just isn't good journalism, really. But he said, I just want to make sure it's not harmful to Brian. So I said, okay, you can see the piece and you can make comments, but I'm not promising any changes at all. So we had that deal. And he does not come off well in the piece. I mean, he would call me up and say, oh, I just put Raquel in the hospital. You know, I don't know if he did or not, but I mean, you know, he was a fraud. And what he was disbarred for was that he had tried to take over Brian's business and be the publisher and the producer of all his albums and all this stuff. But there's a movie about it, The Love and Mercy. It's really good. I liked it. But anyway, so and I ended up with this piece that I forgot to put. So that's the story. So I thought it was a very touching piece, and it was a good portrait of not only Brian, but his family and the world he lived in. And there were some good moments in it. There was, his mom talks about the time she learned first that Dennis was hanging out with this guy named Manson, and then that Manson was arrested. That threw a lot of people for a spin, especially in that area of Hollywood. And there's this one part. And then there's at the end, the piece ends with this sort of visionary thing. They're all on a pyramid on a surfboard or something, and I had Murray Wilson, his father, I tape recorded years earlier for another Brian Wilson piece, not mine, but I just wanted to get some information, and I still had that recording. So sort of in the clouds, Murray Wilson speaks, and his first line is, "I'm sure these guys didn't give you the facts right," and that's the way he was. And so that was a good piece, and one of the more memorable lines in the piece, I think, or parts of the piece, was we all went to the Chinese restaurant for lunch, and Brian Wilson walks in. You know, he's kind of big, and he just says, "Got any shrimp?" I mean, that's just the way he thought. But anyway, he maneuvered the seating so that he and I were alone from all the rest. They sat at other tables so that we could do our interview alone. And I'm just reading a little excerpt from that. And it's that, let me just get it here. So this is it. This is the Rolling Stone interview form is, my name's on it. You just ask the question and then the person's name is on it. So it's, what's this program with Dr. Landy and his team designed to do? Brian, well, it's basically designed to correct me from taking drugs. You've had a problem with that? Brian, yeah, I had a problem taking drugs. Up until 4 months ago, I was taking a lot of cocaine. And these doctors came in and showed me a way to stop doing it, which is having bodyguards with you all the time so you can't get to it. What do you think of that approach? Brian, that approach works because there's someone right there all the time. It keeps you on the spot. They catch you when you're ready to do something you shouldn't do. It works until you have finally reached the stage where you don't need it anymore. Why did you consent to this program? Brian, because my wife called the doctors and legally she had the right to call them. Weird. In addition to guarding you all the time, what else do Dr. Landy's people do for you? They teach me socialization, how to socialize. They're just teaching me different social graces like manners. Didn't you at one time know those? Brian, I did, but I lost them. Drugs took them away. How can that be? Brian, it just was. Drugs took them all away. I got real paranoid. I couldn't do anything. Were you unhappy then? I was as unhappy as all heck. I knew I was screwing myself up and I couldn't do anything about it. I was a useless little vegetable. I made everybody very angry at me because I wasn't able to work to get off my butt. Coke every day, going over to parties, just having bags of snow around, just snorting it down like crazy. But aren't drugs just a symptom? There must be something else. Carl said that his brother, Carl said that at some point you looked at the world and it was so messed up that you just couldn't take it. Brian, I couldn't. But the world is messed up. How do you deal with it? Brian, the way I deal with it is I go jogging in the morning. I goddamn get out of bed and I jog and I make sure I stay in shape. That's how I do it. And so far, the only way I've been keeping from drugs is with those bodyguards. And the only way I've been going jogging is those bodyguards have been taking me jogging. So in one sense, you're not fully committed to this idea. Brian, it's just that once you've had a taste of drugs, you like them and you want them. Do you take drugs yourself? Yeah, I experiment. Brian, do you? Do you snort? Sure. Brian, that's what I thought. Do you have any on you? I said, no. Brian, that's the problem. Do you have any uppers? I have nothing on me. Brian, nothing? Not a thing? No uppers? I wouldn't lie to you. I wish I had them, but I don't. Brian, do you have any at home? Do you know where you can get some? See, now I guess you got to get to the point in the program where you're not going to ask me questions like that. Brian, that's right. You just saw my weakness coming out, which I don't understand. I just do it anyway. I used to drink my head off too. That's another thing. They're keeping me. They've been keeping me from drinking, taking pills, and taking coke, and I'm jogging every morning. Had your wife not gone to see Dr. Landy and got him to work on you, Brian, I'd have been a goner. I'd have been in the hospital by now. Anyway, he did great. You know, he's a real hero of mine because he finally did release that album years later with a different band. But I mean, he kept that. His compositions are just amazing. Anyway,
Yeah. Wow.
Steve Martin. Now, for the Steve Martin piece, I tried something I'd learned in college, creative writing, about form and content. You know, I don't know. It was like the form's supposed to resemble the content. I don't know. It was I didn't do very well at the class, but Steve was known for leaving the stage. I mean, I went to see him at the boarding house. It's a nice club in San Francisco, and he would jump off the stage. He would, as we filed out after the show, he was out there greeting you. He would say things over the microphone and about the audience and all this stuff. And and there was a story that he had taken the whole audience out to McDonald's and bought them all hamburgers, and you know, he was just nuts, and in a wonderful way that made you, if you were around him enough, you started acting like him, which was a very freeing thing. You know, I actually wore a bunny suit one Easter, so I contacted Steve and I said, had him work with me, write some stuff, so that he would step out of the story in the magazine and pop up in different parts of the magazine. So here, I'll show you. Well, even this cover, which Annie did, shows him in a box, kind of trying to get out or something like that. And here's he's in the index. He said, "Hey, I'm Steve Martin. I'm not trying to be a big shot or anything, but my story begins on page 58." You know, his whole act was this egotistical idiot. And then here's my favorite. It's a letter to the editor in the same issue as the story is. And says, I know you'll probably just throw this letter away, but in David Felton's article, RS 253, I was seriously misquoted and would like to set the record straight. I always felt people who yelled about being quoted out of context were sniveling whiners. But now I see their point. Felton quoted me, "It's hot today." What I really said was, "Hey, it's hot today, isn't it?" Hey, implying the existence of a listener, and the "isn't it," requesting an overt response from the listener, be he real or supposed. It's this kind of lousy journalism that says on me really, "Hey, cancel my subscription, isn't it?" And then loose talk, well, does the Pope shit in the woods? Read my story on page. Well, this is just a picture of me interviewing him, author hanging on subjects every word. And then this is the end of the story, and it's a big piece. And he's fighting, and it ends the page before, and I have to call the art director to have more space. And then he doesn't want that, so he keeps talking after the Oscar rule, what's the name of that college? Anyway, this rule, and his words come around the edge. Here, I don't know if the curses are working, but you can see, and it actually ended with a big "excuse me," which was one of his things. So, it was the largest selling issue of Rolling Stone up to that time, and the story included some of his best bits, word for word, which concerned him at first, but it seemed to just increase the attendance. And I saw him at the boarding house when they started the story. When the story came out, he was playing the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in L.A. He came out on stage and said, "Oh, how much did you pay for your?" He says, "I'd like to start with the magic dime trick." I don't know, because there's people waiting in the balcony. But anyway, people were mouthing the words to his jokes. They were yelling out routines they wanted him to do. It didn't seem to cut the attendance at all, because he'd become a rock star, you know. And actually he mentioned all this in his autobiography, Born Standing Up. He mentions me in the story and everything, and how it had helped him. And then what do we got here? In 1981, I left journalism to try TV comedy, and I had some success. I had an episode of Square Pegs and an episode of fairy tale theater, but I think I didn't really like living the freelance life. It was, you know, so I finally got my third job. I only had 3 jobs, as I mentioned, I joined MTV doing on-air promos and other nonsense. I mean, since we were the only music channel at the time, this started in 81, our promos could just be nonsense, and there were there were a lot of very gifted writers and directors that Judy McGrath had hired, and she became head of MTV at one point, and then we had a short animation show called Liquid Television, which was sort of experimental animation. And one day this guy, Mike Judge, came by and had a little episode of Beavis and Butthead, Frog Baseball it was, and we developed a whole show from that. and that's where the T-shirt comes from. But you know, you never know what's coming down the pike. That show was so big that my father, who was still alive and living in Orange County, California, was asked for autographs because he knew me and I knew Beavis. So it's and actually, I ran into Annie Leibowitz, who was in Rhinebeck. She had a diner. She had a place near Rhinebeck, and she scolded me. She was living with Susan Sontag at the time. She said, "I'm very ashamed of you, David. You shouldn't be writing Beavis and Butthead," you know, and all this stuff. But I felt it was just a new kind of writing. I mean, I've always liked writing for sort of brain damaged people because it's just a different way of. I don't know. It's like Randy of the Redwoods was a character that I didn't develop, but I brought him to MTV. Jim Turner, and he's this acid fried, you know, hippie, middle aged, like me, and so Newsweek had an issue about the cover story about the dumbing down of television or dumbing down of America or whatever, something we can all relate to, I think. But and I'm quoted in it, and I say it's writing stupid. Not everybody can do it. It's like returning to the place where thinking begins and staying there. And so I was going to give you this horrible little treat. This is I didn't work on the Beavis and Butthead movie, Beavis and Butthead Do America, but I helped promote it, and so my judge gave me a credit, which I asked for, which is spiritual advisor. So on the movie, you know, and but to promote one thing we did to promote the movie is we would send out a fake interview that anybody could do. They could ask the questions, and then we already recorded the answers. Mike judged it as Beavis and Butthead, and so. This is one of them. And so any newscaster or on TV or radio could do this. So the question is, Q, while shooting your movie, you got to see a lot of America. What part of the country did you like the most? Beavis, the boobs. Question, what? Butthead, I think Beavis is referring to Las Vegas, which also happens to be a personal favorite of mine. Beavis, yeah, Las Vegas rules. They have this huge statue of this naked chick, and you can stare at her boobs all you want. But yeah, like 2 whole days and 2 whole nights and no sleep. Beavis, yeah, and we didn't even get slapped. But it made me realize that the breast is a beautiful thing. Beavis, really? I mean, you'd think staring at a breast all day would get pretty boring. But I think that's why they added the second one. You know, to keep things interesting. And so, well, do we have time for me to talk about Hunter a little bit?
Yeah.
All right, so one of the things that the advantage of working at a startup like MTV and like Rolling Stone was you get to do stuff for the first time. And so I had the chance to edit for the first time after being a writer. And my first edit was Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas with Hunter. And I first met Hunter while I was still living in Pasadena. And we were going to talk about doing another story. He came by and he knocked on the door and then he didn't even say hello. He just had this piece of paper in his hand. And he said, listen to this. We were somewhere around Barstow on the edge of the desert when the drugs began to take hold, which is the opening line of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And he knew he was onto something. And so editing that was kind of wild. I mean, at one point, at one point I sent Oscar back to Las Vegas for the National District Attorney's Conference on Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. And then I got a phone call, and I could hear all this glass breaking in the background and screaming, and Hunter said, Oscar's gone insane, I can't control him, he paid $200 for a flute, and all this stuff. That was all staged. All that stuff. And actually, a lot of the story is staged. That's what Gonzo is. You know, they set up what's sort of some funny situation, and then he would write it down. And actually, Bill Murray, who played him played a character like him in Where the Buffalo Roam, said that he thought that Hunter was more of a comedian than a writer. He's a great writer, but he said he was really a comedian. And the way the example he had, these aren't in my notes, I just remember this. He said he would see a bottle lying on the floor, and he would eye it, and then he'd walk over and pretend to trip on it and say, "Holy Jesus," and all that stuff. I mean, that was just, he sort of planned stuff. But that was Bill Murray. But anyway, enough. So it was a lot of fun being with Hunter, but it also could get scary. And we, on December of 1971, Rolling Stone had its first editorial conference, and here's a picture of them at Big Sur. And let's see, there's Hunter, there's Jan, there's John Landau, who's manager of Bruce Springsteen. Yeah. There's Esther House, there's me, there's Ben Factores, and you know, you might notice one thing about this picture: all men. Mm-hmm. There was only one woman invited to the conference, and that was Annie, who took the picture. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that night we had a little crisis around midnight. Hunter had run out of wild turkey, or was running out, and the only place you could get it was Carmel, which was 40 miles to the north along this really treacherous Highway 1. And if you've ever been out there, and he, Hunter said something I've heard before. He said, "All right, we have a choice." He turned to me and Annie. "We have a choice. We can call it a night, or we can take the rest of this mescaline, get completely twisted, and act like animals." It's obviously a rhetorical question. We were driving up Highway 1. Annie and he were in the front. They had an open bottle of wild turkey. I was in the back, a bucket of ice for some reason, and a bunch of joints. And the California Highway Patrol pulled us over. And I thought, we're going to jail for sure for a long time. And if I had been the driver, I would have been very polite, very respectful, and that sort of thing. Hunter, on the other hand, as soon as they opened the window, he said, "You might as well arrest me. I've been guilty all my life." And so then they told him to get out of the car and take this drug test, you know, where he closed his eyes. And Hunter, as he was getting out, he said, "Annie, I think you better photograph this." So he did. There's a picture. And he was supposed to touch his nose with his eyes closed, and he missed. And he said, "Well, one leg is shorter than the other." And the cop said, "Well, one of mine is too. I can do it." He says, "He tried it again." This time he flipped his head back, his glasses fell off, and he caught him from behind. And he said, "That should count for something, shouldn't it?" And so we, I don't know, we escaped. And we became fast friends after that, I think. And here's a picture of me the next day at Big Sur with Hunter. And then years later, just after Susan and I went to China and adopted Grace, I wanted her to meet Hunter, and he was at a publishing party. And this is that picture. And this is John Wenner in the middle. And I think he tried to get Grace drunk, but anyway. So it was fun being with Hunter, but as time went on, it became much more difficult to work with as an editor. And I think it might have been that in 1974, they came out with this book of Sigmund Freud's cocaine papers. So we thought it'd be fun to have Hunter review it, because Hunter had never done cocaine. He looked down on it. He'd done everything else, but he hadn't. So he called me one night and he said, "This cocaine it's worthless." And he says, "Well, describe to me the high." And I said, "Well, it's sort of like, speed, but with maybe a little more exhilarating." He said, "See, you can't even explain it. This is bullshit," and said, "But there's a couple of lines of it here. I think I'll finish it." And from that time, he had a hard time writing. He was just I think it was different. No, I think that's true. Anyway, he did change. For a while, he was really very hard for him to finish anything. It is for me too, but I'm not on drugs. It's just naturally slow. But so the last piece I worked on him with was in 1976 when he wrote this piece that basically was endorsing Jimmy Carter for president. He liked Jimmy, but I noticed through the story that it had the word Sloat. I mean, I know there's a Sloat Street or Sloat Avenue in San Francisco, and then might have been a Sloat High School, but there was a Dr. Sloat, and then there was a Sloat cereal, and he was doing this gonzo thing where he just puts that word all through the piece just for fun, you know. And then there was a part where this senator comes out and opens his trunk, and he has in it the Hope Diamond. So on the night we put the paper, but the reason why every editor who worked with him eventually broke down in tears is that for a week I didn't get sleep because he would file some copy on he calls it the Mojo, this wire thing, and you would get it and you would have to have something to do with the file thing he filed a couple days before, and it didn't. So you had to figure that out, and that would go on and on. So he would sleep between writing, but you would stay up for a week, and it was bad. So anyway, we were finally putting this thing to bed with the story, the magazine to bed. Everybody was there, and I was going over the story with Hunter with just little changes here and there, and then at the end, I just said, where you have the Hope Diamond, that could be the Sloat Diamond. He said, Jesus, that's a great idea. So he changed it to the Sloat Diamond. And we published it. So then we moved to, this was while we were still in San Francisco, then we moved to New York. And I ended up doing an interview with Hunter for what they call the college papers. And it was just like, it was like two old friends really getting at each other, because they'd come out with this first anthology of little pieces, and it was a piece of shit. I mean, it was so badly slapped together. There were pieces missing, and so I had a lot of ammunition I said, and so this is what ran. It was called Hunter Thompson is Cassie's Check, and anyway, we go back and forth, and actually at the end he talked about how he'd like to die, and it is the way he'd like to have his ashes shot up in the scanner, which is what finally did happen, but this was 30 years before. Wow. But he, anyway, it was a fun piece, and then years later I was going through my bookshelf, and I came up with the book, The Great Shark Hunt, The Gonzo Papers, Volume 1. And then he had inscribed it, December 11th, 1979, at Owl Farm, which is where he lived. David, here's the book you failed so wretchedly to organize. I mean, I had nothing to do with it. And now this thing is more valuable than the Sloat Diamond. What the fuck is wrong with you anyway? You also owe me $4,000 for smack and cocaine. Anyway, I was very glad to find this. So that's it. Thank you. I do have one last thing. Where is it?
And then David, let's have a little Q&A.
Yeah. I just wanted to read this. This is when Manson died. I wrote an obituary in Politico, and it was pretty good. It was called "The Murderer Who Killed the Summer of Love," and the last paragraph I just want to read. The whole Manson saga was unsettling for sure, but in retrospect, what really bummed me out was how Manson ruined things for the rest of us hippies. There was a time in the 60s when you gave rides and shared your weed with total strangers just because we were all brothers and sisters under the sun. We didn't walk in fear. Maybe that was risky. We shouldn't have trusted the Hells Angels at Altamont. But I think the desire to have and trust one another is a good, strong human trait. It's one of our superpowers. Manson is dead, ding dong, but his spell lives on. New villains rally to replace him. I'm sure you have your own list. And terror and intolerance grow throughout the land. So maybe it's time to brush up on our superpowers of love and understanding, because the other stuff just doesn't work. So, question.
How old was Thompson when you worked with him, when you first met him?
God, I don't know. I don't think, about my age probably. I mean, maybe a little older. Not a lot older. I don't think he was younger, but I really don't know. I forgot to ask him. You know, I do think one of the reasons he did take his own life, you know, he shot himself while on the phone with his wife. But he was having a hard time physically, and I think really, this is just my opinion, but that his act no longer worked. He had a sort of act, which was to, and he was a star, and I think being a star can be a real burden too. But anything else? I'm glad people are still awake.
How do you handle rejection?
You mean personal or?
Yeah.
How do I?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, you've been rejected, I'm sure, many times in interviews and writings.
To tell you the truth, the one time I was rejected, I was still drinking too much, and I had my first rejection from a Sunday magazine. I'd written this piece, but I'd been drunk while I wrote it and everything, and they called and said, what, they said, we don't need it, we'll send you a kill fee. I said, no, I can rewrite it. And they said, no, we'll send you a kill fee. And I was so upset, and just then a friend of mine called and said, why don't you go back to meetings? And I did, and I've been sober ever since. So that's how I handled it. So,
Who was your favorite rock and roller that you've ever met?
that I did meet or not meet?
Or that you met and interviewed?
Oh, well, there was two that I didn't do a lot of music. I did mostly comedians. But I did Randy Newman, who I really liked. I actually had another story. I was on my way on that story to interview him in a studio in L.A. And I got on the plane in New York, in San Francisco. Jan, the night before, said, you got to finish this other story before you go. And I didn't. I was bad with deadlines. I didn't respect them, really. I mean, I don't know why they keep doing it. Why they did, But anyway, before I got on the plane, I got a call. This was in the morning. And he said, David Felt, please go to this stand. And it was Jan's secretary. He says, you got to come home and finish the story. I said, I got to get out. Randy Newman's doing his new album. I got to go. And with me was Oscar Acosta, because I was a friend of his too, Hunter's lawyer. And so we got on a plane, and the stewardess came up, and she said, I want to tell you, Mr. Felt, we have no legal right to do this, but your boss called. He wants you to finish your story. And Oscar's going, yeah, you got to get up. I said, fuck him, and I went down, and I called Jan right when I landed. I said, he says, I said, this is Randy Newman's big deal and all that stuff. And I said, and he's doing it now, and I'll have the story for you in 2 days. And Jan said, okay, that's fine. That's his game plan, But I like Randy, and I actually wrote the first story of Elton John before, and it was a good story, but I had no idea he was going to be. Nobody did, But I was at that concert in L.A. where he supposedly rises off the ground in the movie. He didn't really write, but it was amazing. He was amazing. Hi.
Hey. I'm wondering, in the earlier days of Rolling Stone, if there were any moments where you felt how the magazine was perceived by other guys you met in the industry, you know what I mean? Other editors, other journalists who were still wearing suits and ties. Did you ever have moments where you could feel that the magazine was maybe, people didn't know what to do with you? I'm just curious.
That goes in general still. I think that we had people trying to write for Rolling Stone who worked for other publications, and that's where Jan found me and found others. He wanted it to be a reputable journalistic magazine covering stuff that other people didn't cover, but he wanted it to be believable, and also, but there was personal, obviously up with Hunter, and you could get. Everybody could get involved a little bit more in the story. But we found that people sometimes applying or Writing Company would send us something that was too Rolling Stone. It was too much. It wasn't right, you know. And I will say one of Jan's things, besides creating this magazine, is he did know talent. I mean, he did know. I mean, he put up with me, and I gave him a hard time. You know, I had a terrible ego. One time I sent him a memo saying, because he said, "You've got to develop good work habits." I kept listening to him, you know. So I sent him a memo saying, "I'll develop good work habits when others around here develop good work." So I had no problem. Somebody was asking about that.
Well, David, thank you.
Well,